freut uns sehr, dass die Interesse für EIOPA da ist, für unser Mandat, unsere Aktivitäten und ich denke insbesondere unsere Aktivitäten im Verbraucherschutzfield. Wie gerade erwähnt, werde ich diesen Vortrag auf Englisch machen, nur weil Deutsch ist nicht meine Muttersprache, ist auch nicht meine Arbeitssprache und dadurch umständlich für mich, auf Deutsch das alles zu erklären. Aber ich nehme gerne Ihre Fragen auf Deutsch, werde manchmal vielleicht aber in Englisch beantworten. Aber wir kommen durch, ich bin mir sicher. In terms of this presentation, I'll be very brief. I have 15 minutes. I'll go through the objectives and the powers and the legal status of EIOPA, and then I'll focus a bit on the stakeholder interaction that we have. In terms of our objectives, well, EIOPA, and I'll come back to the rest of the stakeholders of EIOPA, but EIOPA was born out of the financial crisis, if you like. And that is reflected very clearly in our objectives. They say that we are to protect the public interest by contributing to the short, the medium and the long-term financial stability and the effectiveness of the markets. You could argue that this is the one leg of what we do. The other leg, as important as the first, is that we are there to enhance consumer protection, and according to our founding regulation, this we do by means of taking a leading role in ensuring or promoting simplicity, fairness and transparency, and the subsequent panel discussion will then go into what that means in practice. If we look a bit on the how we're going to implement these objectives, well, again, according to our founding regulation, we are to establish what is called a single European rule book. And by that is meant that we are to assist our members, the national supervisory authorities, in interpreting and applying union legislation in a consistent way, and in this manner assist in the functioning or the efficient functioning of the internal market. Another area where we are to foster convergence, that is generally supervisory convergence, legislative convergence. We are also to strengthen the oversight of cross-border insurance groups. And last but not least, we're active in the international arena where we promote European supervisory standards. If we look briefly at the powers that EIOPA has, powers is such a strong word. I think the strongest power we have is to prepare what we call, and apologies for the abbreviations, but otherwise the slides become unmanageable. We prepare draft regulatory and implementing technical standards. So we prepare them and the Commission endorses them. The draft regulatory standards, they're basically to be prepared with a view to establishing what is called delegated acts, and that means that we're preparing a delegated act for the Commission that is basically based on, it cannot contain any political choices, but it is based on the underlying legal provision or legal act on, that empowers EIOPA to prepare these. Likewise, for implementing standards, they can also not contain any political sensitive choices, so they keep at a detailed level, are to be kept at a detailed level. The implementing standards, they are to basically fill the conditions or define the conditions under which the act on which they are based is to apply. But why is it that EIOPA can only prepare and not adopt? Well, this is based on the so-called institutional balance of powers. As you will know, the treaty that basically rules and governs the European and the Union cooperation lays down the institutions that can adopt, that can initiate and adopt legislation, and EIOPA is not one of them. EIOPA is a regulatory agency of the Commission, and given the given this balance of power, this division, allocation of competences, EIOPA cannot issue any binding rules or legislation. And that is why we prepare for the Commission then to endorse. An area where we prepare and adopt ourselves is the guidelines that you may be familiar with. Guidelines are legal acts, but these are not legally binding. They will also not be binding once EIOPA adopts them. What they do hold, however, is a comply or explain mechanism. And that means that the members, again, the national supervisory authorities, they have to inform whether they comply with the guideline or whether they don't. And they also have the option of saying that if they don't, whether they intend to comply. And these answers we make public, so there is a certain element of naming and shaming, so that those that do not comply and don't intend to comply at any point in time, the public will be aware. So that is the little hook we have in implicitly fostering the compliance with the guidelines. In terms of guidelines already there, we have one set of guidelines in the consumer area. These are guidelines on complaints handling for undertakings, and as some of you may be very well aware even, we are currently in the process of finalizing similar guidelines for insurance intermediaries, and the public consultation for commenting on those has just closed, and I know that some of you indeed have commented. Another set of guidelines in preparation is in the Solvency II area, where we're doing what we call preparatory guidelines for Solvency II. We can also issue decisions and opinions, again, not legally binding instruments. We render advice to the institutions in Brussels, be that the Commission, the Parliament, less so the Council. The Council there we have not a direct role. We settle cross-border disagreements between our members. And if members cannot agree and there is a facilitation of a compromise and they still do not agree, we even have the competence to settle these with binding, let's say, of a binding nature. We also have certain emergency situation powers where there is, we basically facilitate and coordinate the activities of our members where there is what is called an adverse development, so a negative development that affects financial stability, and where the Council decides that there is an emergency situation. We also have a certain coordinating role and decision-making power. However, you wonder whether there will ever be an emergency situation in the view of the Council, because, I mean, if we don't have an emergency in the financial markets right now, then it's difficult to imagine that there would ever be anything that is or at least could be more worse than what we have seen in the last couple of years. Last but not least, we can issue warnings in the consumer protection area if a given activity, a financial activity, is of such a nature that it affects EIOPA's objectives. So again, the stability and the consumer protection element and the effectiveness of the markets, then we can issue warnings. But also these are not of a binding nature. Very briefly on the legal status of EIOPA. As I said, introduction-wise, we were born out of the financial crisis. So we are part of the European system of financial supervision, which includes not only ourselves and our two sister authorities, ESMA, responsible for supervision of securities market, and EBA for the banking market. It also composes of the ESRB, that is being hosted by the European Central Bank, the Joint Committee, which is a forum where the parties basically discuss and agree and take initiatives on matters that have a cross-sectorial dimension. And of course, last but not least, our members are part of the ESFS. As I already said several times, we are a regulatory agency without binding powers. So again, we are there to ensure convergence in the regulatory field and in the supervisory field, but we cannot impose anything. And this agency status is complemented by the fact that we are independent from the Commission, from other European institutions. And the other side of being independent means, as I've put in the last bullet point, that we are accountable to the European Parliament and to the Council. We have legal personality, meaning that we can be taken to court for our actions or inactions. And in terms of our funding, we are partly funded by our members, the biggest part, the 60%, and 40% is paid currently by the Commission. This leads me to my last slide on substance, and I think what the organizers asked me to focus slightly more on, and that is the stakeholder interaction that we have. EIOPA can only function if it gets input from the outside world, and that includes outside stakeholders in terms of industry, consumer representatives, other regulatory bodies and agencies, but also, of course, internally. And the stakeholders, I've made a list of them here. The Commission is clearly an important stakeholder in the sense that even if we're independent from them, they can ask us to render advice, they can ask us to look into certain matters, and they, of course, are an important stakeholder in terms of trying to identify where are the most important areas of work and how should we go about it. Our members and observers, as I've mentioned already, they are very important to our work. Without them, we could not do the work. The members are, of course, the members from the European Union, and the observers, those from the EEA area that have not yet entered the Union or may not wish to enter the Union. And they appear in a number of contexts. We have the abbreviation BOS, is for our Board of Supervisors, where they are placed. This is the ultimate decision-making body that EIOPA has. We have a management board that basically prepares the meetings of the Board of Supervisors and have certain tasks in the field of budget. And also the committees. EIOPA is built and construed in a manner that there are committees for all the important areas of activity, of course including consumer protection. So there is a committee that basically prepares the decisions that are then taken in the end by the BOS, by the Board of Supervisors. The founding regulation says that we have to have 2 stakeholder groups. We have a stakeholder group on insurance and reinsurance, the IRSG, and we have one on occupational pensions, the OPSG, and they basically consist of industry representatives, consumer representatives, professional organizations, and trade unions. And the way that we use them is that they are kind of sounding board where all our important deliverables are sent to in consultation for them to give to opine on, give input to, and improve our deliverables. We undertake a number of public consultations. If I remember correctly, our founding regulation says that we are to consult the public if we do guidelines, but we use the instrument of public consultation much further, much more widely. So we also consult on what we call best practices reports and other related instruments. Another facility, another channel of interaction with stakeholders is our annual conference day that we have always in October. And we also have an annual consumer day. We've held it twice in Frankfurt, and this year we held one in Paris together with the 2 other ESAs, ESMA and EBA, on consumer protection issues of a cross-sectorial dimension. So these days really offer a splendid opportunity to exchange and be a platform for dialogue with all the relevant stakeholders. We of course have interaction with industry and consumer representatives in other ways as well, and I think today this event is one of the ways that we facilitate this interaction. And again, just for reasons of completeness, I already mentioned it, but we interact obviously with the other members of the ESRB, or the ESFS, sorry, being the Joint Committee, the other ESAs, the Commission, etc. And a little touch of national interest would be that our Austrian counterparties is of course, the national supervisor, the FMA, and the Ministry for Wirtschaft, Familie und Jugend. So these are our stakeholders. These are the main ways in which we interact with them. And as my final remark for the presentation, there's a very nice quote from the author of The Little Prince, a quite famous book for both young and old, I think. He once said that as for the future, the task is not to foresee it, but to enable it. And that is what EIOPA does in the area of insurance and